Welcome back to Normal Islands Live. I'm Curtis Daly. I'm your host this evening, and I'm joined by a very special guest who I wanted to have on the channel for a very long time, Maximilian Robespierre. Max, I'm thrilled to have you on. How are you doing?
Well, thanks so much for having me on. It was after so much time we managed to get this thing organized, so it's great to see you and it's great to be on the show.
Yeah, I'm really glad you're finally here. It is a real pleasure. But we will get on to the show. Now, the stories we will be covering tonight: Keir Starmer and his wife receiving a lot of freebies from a rich donor. Jeremy Corbyn could potentially be involved in a new political party. Lib Dem Chief Whip accuses Nigel Farage and Lee Anderson for not being committed to their constituents. And finally, was there another assassination attempt against Donald Trump? Some really interesting stories there. But before we start the show, please make sure you leave a comment. We will be reading some of them out. And if you want yours read, then make sure you let us know your thoughts. But let's get on to the first story of the evening. Now, Keir Starmer seems to have a sugar daddy. Yep, you heard that right. Starmer and his wife have been receiving some expensive gifts in the way of a new wardrobe from a donor. The Prime Minister broke parliamentary rules by not declaring clothing given to his wife by Labour peer and donor Wahid Ali. Multi-millionaire businessman Ali financed the purchase of clothes and tailoring for Sir Keir Starmer's wife Victoria, according to people briefed on the move. The donation was first reported in the Sunday Times. The Prime Minister initially received advice when he came into office that he believed he did not need to declare the donations made to his wife, according to the people. He checked again this week on September the 10th and determined that the rules obliged him to declare the donations and promptly did so, the people added. Now we have David Lammy coming to his defence. This is not an issue of transparency. He is attempting to be transparent, Lammy told the BBC on Sunday. The truth is that successive prime ministers, unless you're a billionaire like the last one, do rely on donations, political donations, so they can look their best, both in the hope of representing the country if you're in the opposition or indeed as Prime Minister. Lammy added that he was not suggesting that Starmer was broke, but pointed to the fact that in the US there is a specific budget for leaders and their family members to procure outfits so they can represent the American people well. The issue has triggered particular scrutiny because Starmer has spent the past few years presenting himself as a stickler for the rules and has vowed to root out all forms of cronyism and corruption from government. Now, Lammy is actually suggesting that prime ministers need donations to dress well. Now, aside from the fact that Starmer earns 160 grand per year, you can dress good cheaply. You don't need the most expensive stuff. And what makes me laugh is that despite Starmer earning a hell of a lot of money, is he being tight and not buying his wife any clothes? I mean, look, if I was on that wage, I'd pay for most things. I mean, I'd buy my partner loads of stuff. Maybe Tight Starmer is the new nickname. But this is a pattern, and it's not the first time that Starmer has happily taken freebies. In fact, Starmer has accepted more gifts compared to every single Labour leader since 1997 combined. The freebies have included 11 football match tickets, concert tickets, luxury hotels with some stays that include infinity pools within them. He also received tickets to the British Kebab Awards, in which this is one example of, in my opinion, a return on an investment. Just Eat handed Starmer 2 sets of tickets in 2021 to the British Kebab Awards and the Taste of London events, both of which he gave to staff in his office. The firm is currently facing legal action from lawyers representing thousands of its workers over allegations that it denies them basic rights like holiday pay and minimum wage by categorising them as self-employed. Recent reports have indicated that Starmer is now considering rolling back on previous commitments to enhance rights for workers in sectors like the online delivery market, where jobs are notoriously precarious. Now, Max, I want to get your thoughts on this. First off, Starmer has talked about transparency and corruption. He used this to attack the Conservatives, but he failed to declare expensive clothing from a Labour donor. And I've also just had a word from my producer that Starmer is not going to be investigated by the parliamentary standards for his late declaration. So I want to ask, what do you make of it?
Look, we've been always criticising the Conservatives for taking money from donors. You know, Boris Johnson getting wallpaper, very expensive wallpaper, put up thanks to donors. And I think the optics here are really bad. Starmer has said that he wants to clean up politics. He wants to be different. He talked about running on change. And look, we're not talking about a huge amount of money here, but we're talking about the principle. The principle should be, look, we're not going to take money from donors. We're not going to use donors' money to buy expensive clothes, either for the Prime Minister or for his wife. Look, I think the optics are really bad. Now, I keep coming back to this point, whether it's a very important issue for the public. Generally, people are not really talking about it, but I think if you want to set a standard, you have to lead from the front, and you have to be clear about what you want to achieve, and you have to be different to what came before. So if he wants to say, look, what the Tories were doing was wrong, then he can come along and do something pretty much the same himself. I was thinking about this during the day, and I was thinking, why can't, look, as you pointed out in your piece, Starmer is not poor. He's earning a significant amount of money, and if we add his wife's salary to that, it's over £200,000 a year. So he can afford a suit. But I was looking into this when it came to MPs' expenses, and MPs can't actually claim a suit on expenses. They claim pens, they can claim stationery, claim all sorts of things, but clothing they can't. And I was thinking, well, what was going through Starmer's mind when he was taking these things? Did he not think, okay, this is actually going to look pretty bad? Taking money for suits or getting clothing from a multimillionaire. Did he not think, how would the public react to this? How would the other parties react to this? I've been criticizing the Conservatives over corruption and cronyism for years. How will this look? Was there no foresight there? Was there no thinking of, this is going to look bad? And I was thinking, why don't they do something else, like maybe change the rules in Parliament where MPs can claim clothing on expenses? Or why couldn't he do it internally within the Labour Party? The Labour Party set some money aside. Even if it came in through a donor, they could have set some money aside to cover things like clothing. Now, of course, this couldn't be extended to Starmer's wife, but it could at least be to cover his expenses if he's not able to afford these things. So I think a few things. The optics are really bad. It shows that things are sort of business as usual. And if it is about poverty, I don't think it is, but if it is about poverty, then change the rules. Allow the Prime Minister or ministers to claim these things on expenses. Because at least if it's on expenses, it takes away this idea that somebody's giving you money to get something back in return. As you pointed out in your piece, these people don't give money out of the good of their hearts. They're not doing it because they love the Labour Party or they love Keir Starmer. Maybe to a certain extent, they like the influence they have. They like to be close to power. Maybe they're not all expecting to get something in return. But I generally think multimillionaires and billionaires give money either to achieve something like tax cuts or to stop a party from coming into power that would deliver tax cuts. But as Starmer said that he's not going to increase taxes, that's what he's been saying so far. Maybe multimillionaires and billionaires are happy to donate. They want to maintain the status quo.
I mean, you make a really good point about the optics, and we'll get into the sort of favors in a minute. But the optics is so poor, and I was watching Owen Jones on TV earlier, and he was saying, "Look, this guy is scrapping winter fuel payments for pensioners, whilst also." Getting a lot of money, wearing expensive clothes from by way of rich people's donations. That is, in terms of optics, not a good look. And then people then ask the question, well, you tell us about tough decisions. You got to keep the 2-child benefit cap. You've got to scrap winter fuel payments. It's all about tough decisions. But these guys, the MPs, the prime ministers, these people in power, they live an entirely different world to us. And look, we all know that's the case. We know that if you're an MP, you're pretty damn wealthy and you have good connections. But at least try and not kind of shove it down our throats. And it's just very, very striking that just on the optics level, it's such a dud from Starmer. Now, I'm not particularly asked about the breaking of the rules side because, look, a lot of the papers, specifically the right-wing press, are attacking Starmer on this, but they're calling it indulgent, right? And I'm not surprised that the media have miss the glaringly obvious point, something that we talk about, and that's the influence side. Now, obviously, I gave an example earlier of Starmer walking back his commitments on workers' rights in the gig economy after receiving gifts from companies that operate in that economy. Another example is Labour were looking at taxing digital giants. Then some of the party were giving gifts worth tens of thousands of pounds, and days later they suddenly U-turned on this policy. So yes, I mean, he's a stickler for the rules, and I'm not interested in really attacking Keir Starmer on his contradiction that he's going after the Conservatives for not being, playing by the rules, and he doesn't do it himself. I really don't care. What matters to me is the influence that donors can buy. And it really is hard to justify the idea that Starmer is less corrupt than the Tories. I mean, to me, it's clear he doesn't have the interests of the working class, but, instead wealthy donors. I mean, would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I think so. It's like, if you're taking money from these people, they're expecting something in return. And I've often said on my channel where, a donor can donate tens of thousands of pounds or millions of pounds, and their influence is much more than 100,000 people voting for you or voting against you. And this is a major problem. I'd advocate for something like that's been presented by left-wing commentators in the US. Just get money out of politics completely, have publicly funded political parties, and then you get rid of this need for donors, because the political parties, and look, I'm not against the trade unions donating to the Labour Party, because what they're doing is they're donating in order to improve the rights of workers. They're not, and it really upsets me when I hear about the commentary on this from the right wing. Starmer is handing over money to his union barons, or the union barons. Sorry, it's not about that. They're fighting for the rights of workers, and of course, they're also fighting for people who are not members of trade unions, because if trade unions gain something, if they gain better wages for their workers, this also has an effect on people who are not members of a trade union. But it's different when it comes to big donors, like mega donors, like individuals or business owners. They want something in return. And if we had publicly funded political parties, it would remove this incentive for them. And, when I heard, I just go back to it for a second, when I heard David Lammy's, his excuse was, well, in the US, they have a budget for this, or the president and the first lady have to look really good. Okay, then put it into the Labour Party. Use the Labour Party's funding to cover Keir Starmer's expenses if necessary. But it shouldn't be. You should not be relying on a donor, because the donor will want something in return.
Well, yeah, because David Lammy obviously talked about America and how they can do that, but that's quite funny, because we can't do that in our system. As you said, the rules aren't there in place. So even if he's trying to make the excuse that, well, we need prime ministers to look their part, okay, fine, but by way of donors is not good. I mean, I would say I don't think MPs should be able to claim expenses on clothes. I think they have enough money, but at least if you were to give them the option to add it to expenses, or they get it off rich people, which side I would stand on. It's also very interesting that you brought up unions, and there's a false dichotomy here, which is that the stories in the last couple of weeks when it came to unions, all the right-wing commentators, GB News lot, all the Reform lot were saying about how Starmer is in the pocket of unions, and the way they frame it as well is union bosses, which, by the way, union leaders are elected. There's some democratic accountability there. No one elects your billionaire donor, right? But there's a false dichotomy, because for me, there are two different things. And I find that really funny, because in the media, they'll happily talk about money and influence when it's from trade unions. But when it's from wealthy donors, the best you'll get is, it's indulgent. It's showing off. Well, if you're going to be consistent, why don't you think that's cash for access or favours as well? And it's funny how they do that. But for me, these two things aren't the same thing, because as you correctly pointed out, one side is an organisation where they elect the people, they elect the leaders, and they represent workers on the ground who have little to no power. That's entirely different to a handful of billionaires or multi-millionaires just giving money to the Prime Minister. Now, some people might think, well, it's the same, right? It's money going one way and the other way. Surely we should treat this evenly. I would say I don't think so, because again, like, a multi-millionaire or billionaire can pick up the phone and speak to Keir Starmer, but your average worker can't. So I think there's an inherent power imbalance there. So I think allowing trade unions to give money to political parties just rebalances that.
And
but that's a very good point.
Yeah, and it's also the case that the trade unions are not really getting something from the government. If they're trying to lobby the government, they're getting something for their members, the workers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not like, a multimillionaire is calling up Keir Starmer or the Prime Minister or whoever and saying, look, there's this tax cut I'd really like to go through. I've sent you, an extra £500,000 in the post. Can you make sure it gets, because it benefits them directly, while the trade unions are representing somebody and they are benefiting from it. Like, I know Mick Lynch isn't his organization isn't affiliated with the Labour Party, but Mick Lynch doesn't benefit if the government introduced better legislation. And it's not just about money; it's also about working conditions. It's about work rights for workers. And as you pointed out, there's a real concern that there's a backtrack on protections for workers, especially those who are the most vulnerable. Because while somebody may be a member of a trade union, they're struggling like everyone else to pay the bills and feed their family. There are another section of society who are not protected by many. They're not part of a trade union, so they don't have those protections. I'm talking about people on 0-hour contracts and people in the gig economy who have pretty much no protections, and they have no power. So it's, while who's speaking to the government on their behalf, in a sense, it's the owners of these companies, the Amazons, the delivery companies, the Ubers of this world. They're the ones who have the ear of the Prime Minister, and they're not doing it on behalf of their workers, they're doing it on behalf of their shareholders.
Yeah, and union money is the cleanest form of money. It's very transparent. I mean, look, I think there's a difference between maybe a corporation, a business, or a handful of billionaires giving money to political parties to water down regulation, especially when it comes to climate change, for example. Like those policies that could enrich a few people but could be a detriment to our planet. That is far different to a union giving money to a political party in the hopes that in return they will give stronger workers' rights, for example. I mean, they're entirely different things. And also, there's more workers than billionaires. I mean, if we want an economy that works for the majority of people, that just makes sense to me. But you made some very good points there, but we will have to move on. Time flies very fast. But let's go on to our second story of the evening. Jeremy Corbyn attended a meeting with other left-wing figures who have created a new political party called Collective. He was also joined by former Unite leader Len McCluskey, Andrew Feinstein, Jamie Driscoll and independent candidates. Key figures in the group said they hoped the party would act as an incubator for future leaders who could replace Corbyn as a figurehead of the left and aim to contest seats at the next general election. At a private meeting on Sunday, where Corbyn gave the opening speech, founders said they would begin drawing up democratic structures for a new party to launch. A source close to Corbyn said his attendance was not an official endorsement and that he had attended the meeting to listen to and share a variety of views about the way forward for the left. Organisers said they hoped that forming a new party would be a way of garnering new support. There will be a new left party that will contest the next election and hopefully be a meaningful counterweight to reform and the right-wing drift of the Labour Party, one said. It is understood not all attenders are in favour of a new left-wing party, including Andrew Feinstein and Jamie Driscoll. It also may not ultimately involve the 4 independent candidates who won seats at the last general election on a pro-Palestinian platform, and who have subsequently formed a parliamentary alliance with Corbyn. Pamela Fitzpatrick, the director of Corbyn's Peace and Justice Project, who will be the movement's director, said, "Now is the time to become an established party." So obviously, it's not confirmed that Jeremy will be involved in this new party, but him being there and addressing those who are does mean there's a possibility. And further evidence that suggests that he could be involved is Pamela Fitzpatrick. She's the director of Corbyn's Peace and Justice Project, and it seems she is the head of this new party. And obviously, when I say head, that's more of the sort of behind the closed doors. Max, I mean, first off, do you think that Jeremy would join this new party? And I suppose my follow-up question is, I mean, what do you make of Collective, which is the new left-wing political party?
So I think there's a good chance that he will join it because he shares a lot of their views. So I do think there's a good possibility that he will. I don't know whether he'll be the leader of it, but he certainly will be a senior figure within that organization. Now, I'm probably going to upset a lot of your viewers here about what I'm going to say next, because I actually think that Jeremy and some of the independent MPs should actually join the Green Party, because I think the Green Party, we were expecting them to do really well at the last election, and they did a lot better than before. But I think a lot of us were hoping that they would pick up a lot more seats, and unfortunately they're behind Reform UK at the moment. But I think now, maybe I'm wrong in this approach, but I think a lot of the left-wing parties, MPs, I should say, instead of being in a way out on their own, I think they should join the Green Party, and because a lot of the views they have are shared by the Green Party, and I think I was really hoping that Jeremy would join the Green Party, because he could be a huge voice for them. They had their previous MP was a massive voice for the environment, for example. But when she stepped down, I think there's still a bit of a vacuum there, and Jeremy could have filled that vacuum. And I think a lot of the policies that the Green Party support would be ones that Jeremy Corbyn would support as well. So I was a bit disappointed that he didn't join the Green Party when I don't know whether there were discussions taking place between the two, but I would be an advocate for a lot of the left-wing parties because there's strength in numbers. So if you can get behind something like the Green Party, it's already established. You have the same opinions. It shows that the left is left. Or it doesn't show, but it sends a message that the left is less divided. Because I think there is a big problem that we have on the left, is that we are very divided, and we disagree over too many things and not agree on enough, and this creates too many splits. Now, it'd be great to get some feedback from your viewers on that, but I would be advocating for Jeremy and others, instead of forming their own organization where they won't have as much power, and I mean power as in the media, because if Jeremy was, for example, to join the Green Party, I think he would be invited more on TV. He would be able to have a bigger voice, while I think the media in particular will sideline him when it comes to new organizations like this. So what do you think about that? Would it be a case of having these MPs and Jeremy join the Green Party to have a stronger voice, or are there too many differences? Maybe I'm doing the interview a bit here instead.
Well, I mean, in the danger of upsetting both of us, upsetting the audience, I agree, actually. I mean, I think starting a new left-wing political party is a non-starter. I feel as though the left is almost obsessed with new political parties, but the reality is we do live under first past the post, and ultimately this will split the vote. Now, for me, I think, and I agree again, I think the Green Party is the only viable left-wing alternative. They've demonstrated that they can win under first past the post. They got 4 seats at the last election, but how long have they been around? And my fear is that a new left party will split the Green vote and could undermine the work of the Greens. I mean, the Green Party has existed for decades, and only in 2024 they got 4 MPs. I don't think that if Jeremy Corbyn joined this collective, it's very unlikely that they would pull 100% of Green voters. So if you're even if you were to pull 50%, which is impressive, all you're doing is it's an even split, right? That means it's unlikely that the Greens would retain their seats. I also think that you're absolutely right about the media, because the Green Party is an established party, and I think it would be a huge news story if Jeremy joined the Green Party. Now, I've not personally advocated for Jeremy to join the party. I think he's probably, for now, good where he is as an independent and just forming alliances. I mean, he's already got the alliance with the 4 other MPs, the independent MPs. I think doing a unofficial alliance with anyone on policy would be best suited to him. But yeah, my fear is that this would completely undermine the Greens, and of course, we're pretty much aligned on that. And look, there was a reason why hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, who were excited that Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party. And the reason is because there was a chance of him winning. So we all knew back then the reality of our voting system. Now, the Greens had a lot of similar policies for years, but they only had one seat. So, of course, there wasn't the same level of enthusiasm as there was for Jeremy Corbyn. So to me, I'm just simply applying the same logic, which is consistent. And I think it's only rational to get involved and use your energy if there's an actual vehicle for change. Now, obviously, the Greens won't be in government for the foreseeable future, but they have a path to more MPs. And one day, I think the Greens will have a sizable amount of people in Parliament where they will actually have leverage. So, yeah, for me personally, I don't think I want to see Jeremy join a new party. I think he's better where, him being independent. It's interesting that there were people at this event, Andrew Feinstein, Jamie Driscoll, who said they don't support this. I'm interested that you think he would join Collective. Now, of course, they do align on many political issues, but it took a long time for Jeremy to leave the Labour Party because he kind of has Labour in his blood. It took him a very long time. So why do you think, apart from obviously agreeing on a lot of policy, why do you think that Jeremy would make this move and rather actually not stay?
I think it's because you want to be in charge. Like, if you want to be part of something, so an independent MP can achieve like a certain amount in Parliament, but they're extremely restricted. And as I said before, there's strength in numbers. So I would imagine he would join. No, I'm not privy to what he's thinking, but I do think it makes sense for him to be part of something a little bit bigger than himself. Now, whether he would lead it or not is another thing, or he would just be part of it. But being an independent MP, I think it's limited in what he can achieve, and with the media refusing to take him on or interview him or anything, it's with the exception of yourself, for example. But it's very difficult for him to get any traction, to get his message across. One thing is being in the House of Commons, another thing is to have an organization behind you and to have a party behind you. So that was one of the other reasons why I said that he should join the Greens, or in the last election. But I do think maybe eventually, I'm not saying straight away, but I do think eventually he will join something. If it's not this organization, it could be something similar in the future. Because as I said, if you want to have an impact, you need to have a group of people behind you.
Yeah, I mean, we all speculated that the Peace and Justice Project was going to be a political party, and then the Independent Alliance, which was only formed a couple of weeks ago, could be a political party. Now we have this collective. It's so many different groups, and it's this classic left-wing politics. It's kind of, we love to argue amongst ourselves and split. But again, I think it would be inconsistent to support a new political party when you join the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. And especially under Jeremy Corbyn, there were people in the party who despised him, who didn't like his kind of politics. Yet we all said, well, we're going to join it anyway because we need to win. So I feel like we would contradict ourselves by then going, okay, let's now back something even smaller. Whereas for me, I just want to attach myself to a party that has some sort of electoral value. Now, that's not to say, I mean, Collective could blow up and maybe in 2-3 years they become like Reform, they're polling third. Then obviously I would change my mind, but I find that incredibly unlikely. But
I actually think there's going to be a rise in the left-wing vote going forward, because I think it's going to be very difficult for Labour to fix the economy. At the moment, it's flatlined. I think it's going to be very difficult to grow the economy sufficiently to fund public services, and that's what they're talking about. And if they're not able to deliver, then people are going to go elsewhere, and they're going to look for, at by-elections, at the local. I think the local elections are a real opportunity for smaller parties. As you said, first past the post, it's pretty much impossible to win seats there, unless proportional representation comes along. But there's an opportunity for smaller parties, especially at the local elections. I think that's something that we'll need to keep an eye on, because if Labour in government can't achieve something, then people will obviously look for other parties that they feel are more representative of their views.
True, but worryingly, it looks like the right is benefiting the most. I mean, it was interesting when we were going through. I mean, we did the election coverage live, and we were looking at the numbers, and I was quite surprised that in a lot of seats, you had a third of the Labour vote go to Reform. which is very, very high, given that the story was, oh, it's just Reform is piggybacking off the Tories. But no, there's disaffected Labour voters who went to Reform. So absolutely agree that people are, I mean, polling is showing already that people are disaffected with Labour. I mean, I didn't think people were particularly enthusiastic before. It was a very anti-Tory vote. But the polling now, I mean, they're polling at 29%, which is only 4% above the Conservatives. I know it's just one poll, but obviously the decisions Labour has taken in the last few months hasn't been particularly popular. I hope there is a resurgence in the left-wing bloc, in the left-wing vote. But again, yeah, I don't see how it's.
But we keep sorry to interrupt you, but we keep coming back to the problem of the media, because if you look at who's been interviewed in the media all the time, Farage, Lee Anderson, Richard Tice, they represent a very small section of the vote of Parliament, but they're the loudest voices, and this is a problem for the left. We need to have Green MPs on Question Time. We need to have Green MPs in the media all the time pushing left-wing policies. And if they're not, they're going to be that vacuum is going to be filled by the likes of Reform UK. I think it's interesting what you said about a lot of the Labour vote went to Reform. I think that's because people are sick and tired of politics. They're, I don't want to use bad language here, but it's a bit like, the two cheeks of the you-know-what, that people are looking at Labour and the Conservatives, and they're not really seeing any difference. And I think what Starmer was saying before the election, we're not going to promise anything big. So a lot of people who are upset, and I think it's easy, I'm not going to say about you, but it's easy for me to fall into the trap that, well, people who vote for Reform, well, they're just racist or they're just bigoted or whatever. But I think a lot of people were just tired of politics. And a bit like the Brexit referendum, people voted against the incumbent. They were like, we're tired of the status quo. We need change. Of course, for me in 2016, what they voted for was not what they thought they would get. And I think when it came to this election, people were just tired of the Tories, and they were tired in some cases of Labour and not expecting something better. And there was, Farage and others on the horizon saying, look, on their steed, saying, here, I'm going to promise you the sun, moon, and stars. And people latched onto that. I'm just thinking of the constituents of Clacton. Nigel Farage has gone off to some event on the other side of the world today. He's not taking emails from his client, for his constituents, or listening to their concerns. So I think for the left wing, we need to see a bigger presence in the media. And I think there's things like independent media like yourself here are a great way for left-wing voices to break through.
I love the fact that you bring up the media, because I think that's something that's actually overlooked when we're looking at electoral strategy, when we're looking at different political parties. Because yes, look, Reform is consistently platformed, right? The BBC made Nigel Farage's career, and even after 4 MPs, the Greens are still getting sidelines, but they seem to be the only. I mean, they do get invited on TV now and again, right? So if you want to get platform on the media, I agree with you. I think the Greens is the best way forward. If there's another new political party, whether it's collective or something else, they're less likely to get platformed. They'll say, well, why should we platform you? You have no MPs. You're brand new. When the Green Party have 4 MPs, and they should be on way more than they are, and they make excuses for them. So it's only going to be even worse. So I absolutely agree. The media is the fundamental way of delivering change in this country by reaching voters. Really interesting there, but we will move on. But before we move on to our next story, I just want to say that if you like what we do, you can subscribe and share our content. We currently have 313 viewers. This is actually probably the highest. It is the highest amount of viewers we've had on a standard normal Ireland Live. So 313 concurrent viewers. Welcome everyone if you haven't seen us before. Now, there are 5 of us who are contributing to Turn Left. However, it is all still voluntary. In order for us to dedicate more time to Turn Left, to upgrade our quality and to become a fully realised media organisation, you can support us on Patreon for £3, £5 or £10 per month. Now, those who choose the £10 tier will have their names read out on our live shows. Alternatively, you can give any one-off donation to our Coffee account. Apparently it's called Coffee, which is spelled ko-fi.com/turn left. Please give what you can and nothing more. Let's grow a socialist media alternative to take on the establishment commentariat, and you can be part of the journey. Now, I do want to go to some of our comments. I'm sure you've got some really interesting takes here. Let's have a look. Mark Lungley has become a member. Thank you so much. It's very generous of you. Welcome to the team. Welcome to Turn Left. I really appreciate it. Let's go to another one. Chatty Rat. No point in forming a left-wing party while first past the post is still in place, unless the aim is to help the Tories and reform by splitting the Labour vote. Well, I agree with most of that. I'm not worried about splitting the Labour vote because of two things. One, I no longer see Labour as a even centre-left party, so that's not even splitting the left votes. And two, especially in the last election, Keir Starmer was 100% going to be Prime Minister. So there's not, I don't think there's much fear of splitting the Labour vote. But again, I don't see Labour as part of the left-wing party. But I do think that a new party could split the Green vote. Let's go to another comment. Edward Sexby, good to see you again. The Greens are second in over 40 seats at the moment. It would be mad to split that vote. The Greens could overtake the Lib Dems at this rate. That's a very good point as well. What it does get overlooked, again, we reported on it, is that the Greens are second in so many constituencies. So even though they only got 4 seats, which, by the way, 4 seats is very significant because before July, they had 1 seat. They quadrupled their amount of seats. But come the next election in 4 or 5 years' time, there's no reason they couldn't get 15, maybe even 20 MPs because they are, they're second in so many areas. Let's go to another one. Lee Watts. There are 6 million union members who could be a voice for the left, not a spokesmodel sitting in a Ponzi Newsnight studio. Just saying. I don't. Yeah, true. I mean, is that a reference to this? Because we do better than Newsnight on a zero budget. But I mean, that's absolutely true. We need to reunite the working class in some way, because sometimes political parties, with its labels, put people off. But 6 million union members, that's significant. That's a real opposition there, but it's obviously trying to get everyone together. Let's go to another. Double D, good to see you again. In what other profession are kickbacks and bribes acceptable? They're not. And actually, I've worked in some minimum wage jobs where you can't even accept food because I think is some form of coercion. So you're absolutely right. But when we go to politics, the power that rests on our political system, somehow that's okay. I don't think so. Harley Johnson. They should do an alliance instead. GPEW, the Green Party, isn't fundamentally socialist, whereas they are. An alliance will do. Of course, I mean, there are definitely differences there. I mean, I think there's a lot of socialists in the Green Party, but the Green Party, I wouldn't say are explicitly socialist. Same with the Labour Party, actually. I mean, the Labour Party is a coalition between socialists, social democrats and unions. It's not explicitly a socialist party, but there's so many policies that we all are united on. So, but yeah, maybe an alliance will do. Any more questions or comments? Zeke da Beast. I would have gotten a yacht instead of expensive clothes. I mean, Starmer's not even doing it right, is he? If you're going to take money off multi-millionaire donors, do it right. Get yourself a yacht, not just clothes, I know. Maybe that's just us. That is all for our comments. Let's go on to our next story. Now, Wendy Chamberlain, who is the Liberal Democrats' chief whip, went on the attack and accused Nigel Farage and Lee Anderson of not showing commitment to their constituencies and questioned their priorities at the Lib Dem conference. At the party's autumn conference in Brighton, Wendy Chamberlain suggested constituency work appeared to not be the priority of the Reform UK MPs, both of whom host shows on GB News. Months after it was revealed Mr Farage was the highest paid MP outside of Parliament, with a £98,000 a month GB News gig. Wow. Miss Chamberlain backed potential plans to stop MPs hosting shows outside Parliament. And speaking to The Independent at her party conference, Miss Chamberlain said, "The saddest thing of all is communities like Clacton and Ashfield are the ones that actually need the most assiduous constituency MPs to get underneath the casework. It suggests where your priorities are. If you're earning more from doing that kind of stuff, TV, than you are as a constituency MP, I'd be interested to, excuse me, I'll start that again. I'd be interested to know what the constituency experiences are to date. Now, she talks about GB News, and I certainly want to get onto that topic with, the role of MPs in the media. But Max, I'll start off with this. It's a low-hanging fruit question, but do you agree with Chamberlain that Farage and Anderson are not committed to their constituents they are supposed to represent?
Yeah, I agree to a certain extent. No, I completely agree. Nigel, as according to the report there, Nigel Farage earns more per month for GB News than he does as an MP. So if I were paying you more per month to do a particular job than your current job you earn in a year, which would you do? Who would you be more loyal to? So it comes down to this point. How can Farage be loyal to his constituents if he's earning much more outside Parliament? But also, we keep hearing about how MPs are overworked, stressed, and that they don't have time to spend with their families. But Nigel Farage and Lee Anderson and Richard Tice, it seems, have lots of extra time to do other things. So obviously, yes, they are abandoning their constituents. They should be in their constituencies, listening to the questions. They should have surgeries. I don't think Farage has actually held any surgeries yet, unless it was, look how cool I am surgery. He spent more time, listening to Donald Trump rant and rave about cats and dogs than he's listened to his constituents. And it's not just about Farage and Tice, it's what it does to democracy, because it turns it into a laughingstock, and it convinces ordinary voters that, well, they're all the same. And there are people who are working really hard for their constituents, people who are putting in the hours, listening to the concerns, trying to fight on their behalf. Zara Sultana is an MP I have huge respect for. She's somebody who really has her finger on the pulse of the problems that are facing working class people at the moment. And I think she's a treasure. And she's working hard. Well, Farage and others, they're there just to boost the image of Reform UK. And I think it was maybe it was Harriet Harman who mentioned, and maybe I don't want to misquote her if it wasn't her, but one of the, I think it was a Labour MP, said, look, what Farage is doing is he's going into Parliament, kicking up a bit of a stink, and then using that to drive traffic, to drive viewers to GB News' show after his time in Parliament. So Parliament is a vehicle for him. He's not there to represent his constituents. He's not there to fight on their behalf. And of course, an MP is supposed to represent also those who didn't vote for them in the constituency. Farage is doing neither. He's not representing people who voted for him. He's not representing people who didn't vote for him. He's there just to create an image, to boost his image, and of course to boost the image of Reform UK. If you listen to some of the questions he's asked, they're not related to his constituent. He's not asking, when are we going to get a new hospital, or when are you going to, improve infrastructure in the area? What about jobs? No, it's about immigration, or it's about things that he can use on his show later on. And as I said, it undermines democracy, because while Farage and Tice and Lee Anderson engage in these sort of things, it paints a very negative picture of MPs who, maybe working their fingers to the bone to try and do what's best for their constituents.
Yeah, and you made a really good point again about how, they don't have enough time. They're working so hard. They seem to have a lot of time when so many MPs take second jobs, don't they?
And
MPs can turn up to vote
there
or
are
not.
lots of MPs with second jobs. And when it comes to the second... Yeah, when it comes to the second jobs, I'm an advocate of having no second jobs. Some people will say, well, maybe we should create exceptions for somebody who's a GP, or in the NHS, or somebody who works for a charity. See, the thing is, once you create exceptions, then they will grow. And I think it would be better if it's great to have somebody who's an MP and a GP, or an MP and a doctor. But I think it would be better for them to stick to medicine and leave the politics, because what it does, it creates too many exceptions, and then people say, well, I need to work for this company, or I need to do this extra work for a business, or I need to write a book, or I need to write a column for the Daily Mail and stuff like this, and they will say, well, we're not paid enough. Well, when they're talking down to the working class, they say, well, then just change your job. So we should respond in the same way. If you're not happy being an MP, if it's not paying enough, go and do something else. I'm actually an advocate for maybe increasing the wages if it's not enough. Now, we were talking at the beginning where Keir Starmer, can't afford to buy suits. But if 96,000 pounds a year isn't enough, okay, then pay a bit more, but remove the second job, because once you have a second job, your time is split. And if the second job is paying more than your job as an MP, then what are you going to focus on? Anyone who has two jobs, one job is paying more than the other, they're going to focus on the job that pays the most, and the other becomes a hobby eventually. So we're going to go back to the time of the 1800s where the richest people became MPs because they couldn't. Being an MP was a hobby, and they're not going to represent the working class. They're not going to represent their constituents, and I think this is a fundamental problem. So Richard Tice, Lee Anderson, Nigel Farage, these are people who obviously they're not interested in representing people if it's not themselves.
I was going to bring up the exact point, actually. There was a time, wasn't there, before MPs had a wage, and obviously it was just the rich because they could afford to do it, and actually bringing in the wage for MPs was a very good idea. So yeah, I mean, you might make the case to increase the wage. I think that if you're in the top 1%, you're probably okay. Also, banning second jobs is a must. Obviously, yeah, you said about the exceptions, because I've spoken about this and people said to me, what about exceptions for working in the NHS? Okay, their exceptions I'm obviously absolutely fine with, but you also make a good point that once you have an exception there, it can be exploited. So if you ask me, the choice between some MPs, not a lot, working for the NHS as a second job, or no MPs work for the NHS as a second job because there's no second jobs, I'll take the latter, absolutely. Now, you mentioned earlier on in the show that Farage isn't even in the country. And one of the first things Farage did was to fly to America to support Trump after the assassination attempts, even though it seems they never actually met up in person. I mean, he made it out he was supporting a friend in need. I don't think they were that close. The fact that Trump didn't even know, or he probably didn't even care.
Can you imagine the situation? Your friend has a car accident and you go to be by your friend's side and they couldn't be bothered to see you. Would they still be a friend? I don't know.
Yeah. But millions believe in Farage and reform. And as you pointed out, he's just a rich charlatan. But I want to talk about the media slightly more widely with all political parties, because many have rightly criticised reform figures for having their own shows on GB News. Again, it's outrageous that can happen. It's obviously anti-democratic. The idea that we have the same people who write our laws also exist in the media ecosystem, which is supposed to hold those who write our laws to account, is a clear conflict of interest. But I personally, I don't see the same level of scrutiny when it comes to Labour. I think it's deplorable when we have figures such as Ed Balls, who, all right, is no longer an MP, but clearly represents the more right-wing faction of the Labour Party. I mean, one striking example was when there was a discussion about internal factional battles within the Labour Party, and Ed Balls was clearly siding with the Blairites over the Corbynites, and I think that was clearly unfair. So I want to get your thoughts on that, and how it's not just an issue with one political party, but rather it's become an ecosystem of client journalism. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that and what you think could be done about it. I mean, I know you said about maybe banning second jobs, but also the problem with, as I've talked about, like GMB and Labour, Ed Balls isn't an MP. It's not technically a second job, but I still think there's a problem. So I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, there was, I don't know if you had seen it, but there was an interview that Ed Balls did with Yvette Cooper, who's his wife.
Yes, precisely.
and I was expecting halfway through the interview for him to say, Yvette, did you remember to switch off the gas before you left this morning? This is the sort of, or did you put the cat out? This is the sort of thing you'd almost expect, because
don't be too
absurd.
harsh when you sleep on the couch,
And he's not going to ask her difficult questions. Like, he should have said, okay, I'm going to sit this one out because of my conflict of interest. But he was there interviewing. It was beyond absurd. And it's like, as we said, we criticise GB News, we criticise Reform UK, or the Tories, where you have a Tory MP interviewing a Tory MP, a minister interviewing a minister, or ex-minister. It's the same what was happening on Good Morning Britain. And while David Lammy used to be, when he was in opposition, he had his own show on LBC. That was also a problem, because once again, we come back to this point of, okay, you're not in government, okay, you're not making the decisions at that stage, and it was right for him to step away from that. But MPs are there to represent the public, or represent their constituents. And I think what it does, it creates a sort of weird narrative, or a weird view of politics, when you switch on the radio, you switch on the TV, you go on the internet, and you hear your local MP, or you hear an MP talking about something that's not related to the constituency. And I think this creates a problem within politics. It turns it into something of a charade. So it is a problem within all of the parties. Now, how to get rid of it? I think, once again, it's a bit like the second jobs. You can't be an MP and be, hosting a radio show or something like that. Like, I've nothing against a guest, somebody being brought on to talk about something as a guest, but hosting a show, it can't be a way to do things. So that has to be banned. And then it's not just on new media, it's not just on podcasts, but also, I think, in writing newspaper articles. How many Tory MPs have been writing?
I mean, George Osborne, after he left as Chancellor, then was a regular. He wasn't guest piecing; he actually joined the Observer. Yes. So he's made decisions of austerity, and now he gets to have his voice in the newspaper saying, "Oh, austerity is good." And look, to bring it back to GB News and Lee Anderson for a second. I mean, Lee Anderson's complaining that you're saying, "Oh, you're trying to silence my voice," but I think you're one of 650 MPs who already have a very loud voice. You have the media, you're on TV, you're also an elected official in a very privileged institution. The idea that you don't have enough of a voice is crazy. I mean, think about your average working class person. We don't know. So it's also a sense of entitlement there, isn't it?
But I think for him, in his case, it's, look, if you end second jobs, I'm losing a huge amount of money. I've already booked a holiday, so I don't want that to be impacted. Maybe I'm a bit too cynical there, but they have to think. But once again, we come back to that point we mentioned before. They keep saying that they're overworked. Well, how can you be overworked if you're taking on extra work at the same time? So if you want to be a media guy, if you want to be hosting your own show, then just do that. But don't be a politician. Don't be an MP, because an MP's job is very important. They're there to ask questions on behalf of their constituents. They're there to fight for people in their constituency, both those who voted for them and those who didn't. And this is sort of a separate issue, but one of the big problems I have with PMQs and Parliament and Senate, it's become a theatre.
Yes,
it's no longer serious. I would love for a day when, an MP asks a question and the minister says, actually, that's a very interesting question. Like we're having a discussion here, that's an interesting question. Let me find the answer. And instead it becomes a sort of charade where people, make jokes about each other, or they start talking about something else. And maybe what's happening with the media is that they're going along with that. So they're not treating politics as something serious or something important, and they're more interested in trivial things like, what was it, Lee Anderson's vegetarian son or something like that.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. The media treat politics as a game, and it's not a game. It's real people's lives at stake. But that's how, the interesting political stories for them isn't necessarily policy that affects ordinary working class people. The stories like, Starmer taking money for clothing or some kind of scandal, that's the really interesting stuff for them. And of course it's interesting for them because 90% of journalists went to private school. In terms of their material needs, they've never really struggled. So they've never really had to think about the material conditions. So for them, what gets them off is thinking about scandals and who said what and who said this. But that's a completely different reality to ordinary working people. And there needs to be a huge wall between politicians, MPs, and the media, because the media's role is to critique power, but obviously it doesn't do that. I obviously, given that we set up Turn Left, I could talk about this for ages, but we're actually running over a little time. So we are going to move on to our final story of the night. Now, it seems as though there's been another assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Donald Trump was the subject of a second apparent assassination attempt at one of his golf courses in Florida on Sunday, the FBI has said. A man was spotted aiming an AK-47 type rifle at Trump's West Palm Beach golf resort while concealed in shrubbery around 400 to 500 yards away from the politician when he was spotted by Secret Service agents who opened fire as he fled the scene. He was later stopped in a Nissan SUV by police and taken into custody in a neighbouring county, according to local sheriff Rick Bradshaw. Now, it's worth noting that no shots were fired from the suspect. But who is the suspect? Well, his name is Ryan Ruth, and similar to the first person to attempt an assassination attempt on Trump, his political allegiances aren't that clear-cut either. Meanwhile, records show Ruth registered as an unaffiliated voter in North Carolina in 2012, most recently voting in person during the state's Democratic primary in March 2024. Campaign finance records show Ruth has made 19 small political donations totaling around $140, which is £106, since 2019 to Act Blue, a political action committee that supports Democratic candidates. Although he appears to have supported the Democrats in recent years, it seems Ruth voted for Mr. Trump in the 2016 presidential election before changing his mind about him during his time in office. Ruth wrote in a social media post in June 2020, "While you were my choice in 2016, I and the world hoped that President Trump would be different and better than the candidate, but we are all greatly disappointed and it seems you are getting worse and devolving." But Ruth showed support for Republican candidate Vivek Ramaswamy as late as January. Unsurprisingly, Ruth has a history of running on the wrong side of the law. The Washington Post reports that public records show Ruth faced criminal charges over two separate incidents in 2002 for possession of a weapon of mass destruction, which can refer to a machine gun. He pleaded guilty to the first charge in April 2002, but no other details were publicly available, according to the newspaper. The News and Record reported that later that year, he also charged after barricading himself in a United Roofing building in Greensboro for 3 hours armed with a machine gun. Now, just like the first assassination attempt, there have been people on social media posting fake images trying to spread misinformation. This is just one of many examples where you can see it's obviously a fake profile, mostly made by probably conservatives to make him out to be left-wing. You know, it's got ACAB, LGBT, Dem supporter, anti-fascist, anti-Nazi, anti-MAGA. Now, Max, I want to get your initial thoughts on this. I mean, it looks like another assassination attempt has been made on Trump. 2 in the same election cycle. I mean, assassination attempts are incredibly rare, and Trump has faced 2 in the space of just a few months.
Yes, it's a really crazy season. You know, as you said, extremely rare, but Trump has faced 2 of them. What's interesting also about all of this is that the impact on the public has been minimal. You know, there was a time where, you know, an assassination attempt on a president was almost a guarantee that they would be reelected. But Trump is so out there, so strange, so weird, as people say. And he likes to use that term, as people say. It's not really having an impact. The first one had an impact for a few days, maybe even a week. And then the polls just went back to the way they were. And the same with this. This is probably, I'm thinking it's going to have an even less of an impact because there was, you know, Trump was not harmed in any way. But it is interesting about how, you know, we tend to think politics is very polarizing, and it is. But some of the people were, as you were talking about, the guy involved in this attempt is all over the place. So he's not somebody who you could say, well, this is clearly a Republican or this is clearly a Democrat. It's somebody who voted for Trump in 2016, who's not happy with what Trump did between 2016 and 2020. as you said, he also voted or he backed a Republican, but also donated to the Democrats. So it's somebody who is either a little bit confused, or it's somebody who's just looking at different policies or different politicians. Say, I like that one, I'll send them a donation. We're not talking, I think it was $110 or something like that. So we're not talking about huge, a mega donor here. We're just talking about a few small donations to different individuals, probably because he was having a few beers or something. Well, I like that, I'll send them a donation.
Yeah.
But it is serious about the threats that are to presidential candidates, and whether it's Trump or anyone else. I was very concerned where Elon Musk came out and he was saying, well, why hasn't Kamala Harris been
Yes, it was a tweet, wasn't it, that finally got deleted. I mean, he doubled down, didn't he? He tweeted it and said, what's wrong? What an insane thing to do. It's so dangerous.
Yeah, he has a huge following, and he has a huge following of very crazy people who would be, who would take that as a call to action. But it's, I think after a few days, this is all going to die down, and the polls will return to the way they were before. But I'm really concerned about some of the other language that we're hearing from Donald Trump, like he's suggesting that immigrants are eating people's dogs and cats, eating their pets. It seems that started from somebody who was just, having a bit of a joke or having a bit of a laugh, and then escalated. But it shows how quickly things like that can escalate. But as you pointed out also in your piece about how misinformation like that or other types of misinformation are really cutting through. And in the social media age, we have deep fakes, we have AI images, we have all sorts of weird stuff going out. And it's very difficult to challenge it and to correct it. So I think we're going to see a more polarized society after this election. It's not going to heal, unfortunately, because people are choosing their camps and they're saying, okay, I'm only going to surround myself with the media I agree with, and to hell with the other side.
And the person who made that Facebook post about the Haitian immigrants eating pets, I mean, she's come out and apologized, said this, I didn't mean to do this. I actually feel bad for the immigrants. A stupid thing to do, of course, but she's said, I'm upset that this has been used by the Republican platform and Donald Trump to essentially start a pogrom, because there's been bomb threats now in Ohio or in Springfield. So it's incredibly dangerous. Now, you brought up misinformation, because I'm glad you did, because it is really important to talk about misinformation. Now, the first shooter on the first assassination attempt, right? He was a registered Republican, yet so many lies were spread about that person that he was a radical left and a Democrat. Obviously, this person had a history of mental illness. People forget these things and just want to think, oh, okay, it's just people who are radicalized. And when it comes to Twitter, because it's owned by Musk now, the algorithms are in favor of the right. A lot of right-wing commentators have said, it's the left are dangerous. But we're seeing the same thing here, where some are desperately trying to push this idea that the left are the violent ones. So there are people who actually want this person to be left-wing to match up with their beliefs, rather than being extremely concerned about dangerous people getting their hands on weapons. And it was striking, because after the first assassination attempts, Joe Biden said we should ban the same weapon that was used that was trying to kill Donald Trump. And the political right, the GOP, were like, oh, how dare Joe Biden use this assassination attempt for political point scoring. Well, it wasn't political point scoring. He was making a valid point about guns in America. And had that gun been banned, it's less likely that Trump would have faced an assassination attempt. And the right are muddying the waters. Anytime there's a school shooting, they've now decided, they're all trans, they're black, or they're Antifa, which, to be honest, when you look at the statistics, they're typically white men. A lot of them are, on the political right. Doesn't mean that left can't do violence, but a lot of them are on the right. So I want to get your thoughts on that it's not just about these two assassination attempts, it's the wider misinformation at play here, which is making things incredibly, incredibly dangerous. And Elon Musk is a huge part of that.
But as you said, if somebody wants to come to their own conclusion, what they'll do is they'll find the evidence, they'll lead the evidence to their conclusion instead of following the evidence. So what they'll do is they'll look for, okay, did this guy pull something pro-Democrat sometime in the past? Okay, let's use that to say that this guy is a Democrat. But it's extremely dangerous, and it's very difficult for ordinary people to like I've seen images online where, it's obviously something fake. It's obviously an AI image, but so many people buy into it. They're actually convinced that it's something real. And I don't know how we can counter that. It's very difficult. And it's all over the place. It's not just in the US, it's also in the UK, it's also in Europe. And really, maybe it's education. We need to be able to convince people, look, there are certain red flags. When you see something like this, there's a red flag. You should be automatically on alert when you see something like this. Or if it's somebody on Twitter, you see a name with numbers is normally the one to go with, or it's an account that was just created, or is an account. I was actually confused. I was actually tricked into communicating with somebody who was pretending to be a journalist, and it was very easy to fall into that trap. Nothing came of it, but I'm a little bit more tech savvy or information savvy than your average elderly person is. So we can identify these things, but most people can't, and it's very difficult to educate the public on this.
Well, I mean, you talk about education there, and I think, I mean, when it comes to the biggest sort of supporters, the biggest whether it's Trump supporters or whether it's those that push out this information, I feel like education can't reach them. They're too far gone. But obviously, it's those that don't get that much involved in the political process and see a fake AI screenshot of, oh my God, it's an immigrant eating a cat. Or even if it's a real image, but the context has been completely changed. I mean, there's an image of a person of color, and he had, I think he had a roadkill in his hands. Now, the caption was, oh, Haitian immigrant has just killed a cat. What happened in reality is this person was just moving roadkill off the road, trying to clean up the streets. Things like that. And I mean, I agree with your sentiment here. I don't know how to combat it. We're doing what we can here and trying to provide an alternative view on politics. But to try and get these extreme conspiracy theories, I honestly don't know. And I've had this conversation about legacy media so many times. I'm happy that legacy media is dying and there's more independent media out there. But we've now got another fight on our hands. And the rise of social media, it's brought a lot of bad shit with it. And that is, extremely conspiratorial media, AI, all this sort of stuff. And the rise of misinformation, it's now more prevalent. So legacy media is dying, but what's replacing it isn't necessarily good. Now, I think I could speak about this for hours because this is about the media and it's something I'm very passionate about, and you are too. But we are overrun, and unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. Now, I want to thank everyone who tuned in, who commented. I really appreciate it. And of course, I want to thank Max for coming on too. We have a peak of 361 concurrent viewers, more than usual. That's across Twitter and YouTube. So welcome to those who've never seen us before. Remember, if you enjoyed this show, you can support Turn Left by hitting the subscribe button, or you can share us on Twitter. Just get our names out there. Just tell people about us. Now, if you like our work and you want us to become full-time, then you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 or £10 per month at patreon.com/turnleftmedia. Remember, if you sign up to the £10 here, we'll be sure to read your name out on our live shows. Alternatively, you can give a one-off donation by going to Ko-Fi, that's ko-fi.com/turnleft. My name's Curtis Daly. Thank you, and see you next time.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.